Hmm. And so I think you hinted at this. How diverse is cellular metabolism? Are there core features of metabolism that are shared across the tree of life in terms of how we're generating ATP and making energy for the cell?
Yeah, um, there are certain ones. We have one would be making ATP. We have this bizarre molecular machine called ATP synthase. We all use this. By all, I mean everybody across the tree of life. It's a turbine that sits in membranes of bacteria and archaea. We pump out hydrogen. We produce hydrogen ions from organic compounds. That goes through a shared set of machinery called the electron transport chain. That also sits in membranes of prokaryotic cells. That leads to the pumping out of hydrogen ions outside the cell membrane. That produces a hydrogen ion gradient. Protons are hydrogen ions. Those protons then go back through this molecular turbine called ATP synthase, twirling it around. And in that process, ADP is converted to
Hmm.
ATP. So this is a I find this one of the most bizarre aspects of all of biology. Uh, Essentially, think about building a dam on a river
Hmm.
for a hydroelectric plant. And, normally you would check the river to make sure there's water in it before you build the dam. And then the water just naturally comes down, goes through the turbine, and makes electricity. Well, ATP synthase is sort of like building a dam and then realizing, whoops, where there's no water above the dam.
Now you got to get the water up
So,
there.
our water in the case of ATP synthase is proton gradient, but we have to pump that out outside of bacterial cells so that naturally comes flows back in through
Hmm.
ATP synthase.
I see. Would that imply that the original cell maybe it needed to exist somewhere where such a gradient was already present in the external environment?
Yeah, that's the idea. It's one idea. It's a hint that, why are we using a proton gradient? Where did that come from? Well, maybe because the original form of life was sort of naturally exposed to some kind of proton gradient.
Hmm.
One idea is that might have happened around hydrothermal vents,
Hmm.
where geology is just naturally producing a gradient. That's a really attractive idea because now you've got a non-biological, long-sustaining force producing sort of a gradient.
Hmm.
Now, there's a big
And then
step between that gradient and producing the molecular machine that we use today.
I see. Okay, so that would be why one idea is these deep sea vents could be a site of the origin of life,
Yeah,
cellular
that's
life.
one proposed location.
Hmm.
People
So,
are
but
liking to think about these things and just on the basis of the peculiarities of biology today. Are these remnants telling us something about where life originated? Why did
hmm.
we use certain metals in our cells? Only a handful of them and not others, and so on.
So all life uses ATP for energy. There's no, there's a lot of probably variation on top of that in terms of, obviously you've got plants using photosynthesis and, animals, making the ATP from different sources, but they're all using ATP. They're all using this turbine, this molecular machinery that relies on this proton gradient. That's a universal.
That's a universal. So that goes back to this thing we call Luca. So that would be another example of certain set of shared proteins that we all have.